The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this episode are that of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the values of sponsors or other associated organizations. Welcome to the Parental Compass. I am your host, Bobby Williams. As always, please subscribe to us on Apple Music and Spotify. That way you can get notified every week when we drop a new episode. We got some good ones coming up. A big shout out goes to Family Education and Support Services, the organization bringing you this show every week. Let's get into it. Children grow older, they develop, and they start dating. A nightmare for many parents. But what if it goes even worse than expected? What if they get into a relationship that's abusive, maybe even violent? How can you even know what to do or what's next? Well, here to discuss the issue with me are Erin Freely and Tammy Bacigalupo from Turning Pointe, a survivor advocacy group. As a fair warning to our audience, we are going to be discussing issues like teen dating violence and abusive relationships. So if that's something that's particularly triggering to you, you might want to consider that before moving forward with the episode. Let's get into it.
Typically what we see when children are being forced to give hugs and do things that they're not comfortable with, the reality is majority of the time the perpetrator when somebody is being sexually assaulted is somebody that they're familiar with or somebody that a family trusts. So paying attention to those cues, if a child's like, I don't want to hug my uncle, like, there may be something behind that.
Right.
Yeah, and you don't want to instill just that social pressure of like, you have to touch someone to have things be okay here. I mean, that's not a good value.
Right. And it teaches kids, as Tammy was saying, from a young age that other people get to make choices about your body. Whereas with bodily autonomy, we want to teach kids that they get to make their own choices about their body, and they should be tuned in to what feels safe for them right then in that moment. Yeah.
Really. Well, it seems too like there's, we're talking abuse. Physical abuse seems relatively clear cut in my eyes. But then there's also, psychological abuse or emotional abuse. What does that look like for a teenager?
Yeah, so for a teenager, it could look a couple different ways. When we're talking about, that psychological mental abuse kind of aligns with bullying in a sense. So when somebody's putting you down, breaking down your self-worth, your self-esteem, calling you names, not validating your feelings and your emotions, that really takes a toll on not just teens, anybody, actually mentally and emotionally. And then when you don't feel valued or you don't think you're good enough, that as a teen will roll over into adulthood, and you'll keep thinking that because honestly, it will continuously play in the back of your mind like, oh, so, whether it's a parent, whether it's a person you're in a relationship with, those make everlasting impacts.
I don't know. Teenage years are very emotional in general.
Yeah, and they're just, trying to think back to maybe when I was a teenager, like you're just kind of learning life on your own. You're trying to take your own steps and find your way. And that all on its own can be a challenge. And then when you're not feeling emotionally connected or understood or heard, that can just cause more complications and confusion.
Yeah, and that emotional abuse can really harm someone's sense of self-worth, which is really important for all of us, and especially teens as they're starting to develop their own independent identities and understanding how they want to be in the world. Having a sense of self-worth is really important to that.
My question is then, what does that all look like? Like, what is a toxic relationship?
Yeah, so a toxic relationship, there's lots of different red flags that can come up. So, the biggest one is we talk about is power and control. So when one person in that relationship exerts more power and control over another, um, as far as it looks a little different when we're talking about with teens and then when we're talking about adults. So, a toxic relationship is a lot of times you'll start seeing these little what we call red flags. So, lack of respect for the other person, lack of boundaries, um, you know, mistreating somebody, or hey, you don't have privacy because I want to know exactly where you are, who you're talking to, what media platform you're on. I need you to keep your location on Snapchat so I can, follow your every move. Or, oh, when you're with your group of friends, I want you to video chat with me and I want you to show me the whole room. Um, so there's some other controlling things there. Or, that excessive, like, hey, I'm in school and I'm in school, but yet here you are calling me 5 times in a row. So, you know exactly where that person is. And now you're just
Mhm.
having that control. Like, you have to respond to me.
Right, right. And it can also be isolating individuals. So in a relationship, if one partner starts to isolate another partner from their friends and their family, and even like hobbies or activities that they used to like to do, and looking for those big changes. So are there significant changes in the way that your teenager is dressing or acting, or the friends they're hanging out with, or the things that they like doing? And then just investigating those changes further, having that open dialogue with your child or your teen and saying like, what's going on? What do you want to tell me more about how this situation is playing out or how you feel?
I think it's easy for teenagers to get like very enmeshed in relationships, or it's like they're around all the time, or kind of like that puppy love. So then it's sort of like, how can I tell if this is just a teenager being totally like teenager behaviors, or this is something I should really look into?
The bottom line is it comes down to that open communication and being willing to have that conversation with your child, or anybody else that you think may be in a toxic relationship. So being being available and believing them, and then when they do disclose something, it's really important not to shame them and have that door ultimately closed so you can't have that open communication. So the reality is it's going to be different for each individual and each family, because then comes in different family dynamics and what is acceptable, and maybe in different cultures, or religious beliefs, stuff like that. So that's kind of a hard question to answer, honestly.
Yeah, but just practicing those active listening skills where when you're talking to teens, instead of jumping to solutions or problem solving their issues, just being a safe person for teens to talk to, so that when a teen comes to you talking about some dynamic that's happening in their relationship, they know that you're a person that they can just tell them what's going on. And being someone else to hear that and help them process, is this working for me? Is this good for me? Are there other options that I might want to explore in this relationship or situation?
Yeah.
I think what you touched on of wanting to like find the solution, or that's such a parent instinct to be like, okay,
Absolutely.
let's fix this.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to fight your instincts in a way with that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, because it is ultimately a teen's decision. And they have autonomy at the point that they're a teenager, and they have a right to make their own decisions. So how do you act as a safe person that they can process those decisions with, while while giving the teen the power and control over their own life and their own relationships?
Hmm.
Well, it makes me think about boundaries too.
Hmm.
And there's probably an instinct to want to kind of pry or really figure out what's going on, and you don't quite know the specifics. But then as a parent, you have to have boundaries too.
Hmm.
Where's that balance? Because that seems like such a hard one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on each family and the relationship between the adult and child, and the community and culture and belief system that your family operates in. But whenever you're able to give young people the lead on this and letting them set the boundaries, that's helping them to develop the relationship skills that they need to make safe and healthy relationships in the future. So checking in with your kids, even from a younger age, saying, you know, what role do you want me to play in this problem that you're telling me about? Or, yeah.
As a parent myself, I know it's not easy to have those conversations sometimes because we want to believe that our kids are going to stay young forever, right? And they're not going to do this. But I think it's really important to have those conversations. And in a sense, you're building those boundaries also, and you're helping them identify what a boundary is and how to build that. So especially when we're talking about consent, you know, could even look like practicing with them on how they're going to say no.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, like, not every parent has the best relationship with their child, or things can be a little rocky, and that happens sometimes. So say you're in a place where maybe, like, you know, your kid's not going to come to you with something, but you still obviously care about them. What are other things they could do, or who could they talk to?
Yeah, so part of what I do when I go into the schools is even at the younger ages, I like to help them identify trusted adults. So I think, you know, if you again have those open conversations and you know, like, hey, like they're totally comfortable talking to, you know, Jane Doe's mom about stuff, maybe, you know, checking in with that individual and being like, hey, I think there's something going on and I don't want to pry because I don't want to, you know, in a sense, push my child away, but could you maybe help her navigate what's going on, him or her navigate what's going on? And then during the course of that, especially when we're talking about teenagers, we like to, you know, also remind them that, you know, there's school counselors that can also help. And then there's programs like ours where, you know, you don't have to give your name when you call, and you can just call and talk about, hey, like, you know, maybe they heard something on the news about what a toxic relationship looks like, and maybe it struck a nerve with them, and so maybe they want to call and find out more because they might feel like, hey, this is going on in my life. You know, there's places where you can call and remain anonymous, and those conversations are confidential. So I think as that's a really good resource to let your children know about also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and fostering those relationships with trusted adults that aren't parents from a young age is really helpful too. And we know that it's a significant protective factor for young people to have multiple trusted relationships with adults, both parental adults and adults that may not be acting as caregivers for those children.
Mm-hmm.
So, sometimes it's just easier when it's a family friend, for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Another thing I think about is, like, we're in a totally new age, or like different than when a lot of us were kids, with social media and even texting. I didn't even have, you know, I remember being a teenager and texting was relatively a new thing. Kind of showing my age here, I guess, a little. But the point of that is a lot of sexual things happen online. I'm sure a lot of abuse happens online too. So what can you do to protect against that? Because that just seems like a really difficult one.
that's a kind of a multi-answer question. So again, it's gonna be about having that open dialogue and, you know, talking about you know, once you share something, whether it's a photo, a video, or, you know, even making comments, it's out there on the web and it's out there for anybody to use, whether they screenshot it, or, you know, download it to their device, and then they can reshare it. So, and another thing we like to talk about when we're talking about using all these different platforms is when we're taking pictures, like, we all have habits and routines, right? So if I'm out at the park and taking pictures, like, somebody could easily tell what park I'm at just from my background, right? And then they have that ability to do like a Google photo search where it tells you, oh yeah, this is where it's at, right? So even though you're talking with somebody who may say, hey, I'm a 15-year-old boy and I'm interested in you, the reality is we don't know really who's on the other end. That person portraying that they're a 15-year-old boy could in fact be a 21-year-old or somebody older. And then, so that's a lot of times how perpetrators, in a sense, find their next prey, for lack of better words. It's really difficult because there's so, like we talked about before, there's so many different platforms that people can use. And I believe it's Snapchat, where, you know, your conversation disappears in 24 hours. So if you're a parent who monitors those different platforms, it's hard to see sometimes what they might be talking about. So internet safety is really important to talk about, and to talk about what kind of consequences could happen potentially if a person was to share an inappropriate picture. Because once you share that picture, whether it's with your best friend for, you know, since you were in kindergarten, you still don't know what could potentially happen with that picture.
So, say then your child is the victim of some type of abuse, whether it's internet abuse or they have a relationship that's abusive. What are the next steps? Like, what is 1, 2, 3? And I know it depends on the circumstance, but I guess as general as you can, what would you say to do?
Yeah, so we always want to start by believing. So believing what your child or somebody is saying to you. And then, you know, being willing and open to having that conversation with them, and letting them, like Erin said, you know, let them lead that conversation. And then, you know, sometimes what we hear is shocking. So, you know, it's not always easy to hide like our emotions to what we're hearing, but that's really important, because people pick up on not just your verbal cues, but your nonverbal cues, right? And then if it's not something you're comfortable with, or maybe you're a survivor and it's just hitting home for you yourself, and you can't really process what's being said to you, there's options out there to reach out to, like places like Turning Point, or maybe the crisis line, or you know, there's other avenues to reach out to kind of get that help and guidance if that's not something that you feel like you're able to address or appropriately address, right?
Right. And there's also national hotlines for teen dating violence. So loveisrespect.org is the National Teen Dating Violence Awareness organization. And their hotline is 1-866-331-9474. And they're a great resource. And I'm sure that they could also connect you with any local resources. Of course, Turning Point is available if you're in the Mason County area, but for folks elsewhere, there are resources in your local area. It's just a matter of getting connected.
Yeah, and then another good one is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And they have a chat live feature also on their website. So their website's thehotline.org. And if you want to call, it's 1-800-799-SAFE or 1-800-799-7233.
One thing I really appreciate about getting to do this project is I meet a lot of people that are working to do something positive in the world. So just thank you for the work that you're doing and for being there for people.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing these resources. It's really important that people get access to the resources that are available, and that we have conversations like this, because addressing the stigma surrounding dating violence and other types of abuse is really important, both for survivors and for prevention efforts.
Yeah, so these conversations aren't, you know, I mean, to be honest, they're not always easy to have. And I think the important piece to take from this is be willing to have that open conversation and listen, and to believe. That's, I think, the biggest takeaway is we want to believe survivors, and then connect them with the appropriate resources.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
Tammy and Erin, thank you again for coming on the show. You can look up their organization Turning Point by going to turningpoint.org. That's point with an E at the end. That's our show. On behalf of Family Education and Support Services and myself, Bobby Williams, this has been The Parental Compass. We'll see you next week. Peace.